The church was packed. White roses lined every pew. Soft piano music floated through the air. 200 people sat in silence, waiting, watching, holding their breath in that sacred way people do when they know they are about to witness something beautiful. Amelia Langston stood at the back of the church in a dress that was not hers. It was ivory, floor-length, borrowed from her older sister, because she had not planned for this day, had not planned for any of this, had simply woken up 3 weeks ago to a phone call that changed everything. Her hair was pinned up in a way that made her look older than 28, more composed than she felt, more like a woman who had things under control when in reality every single thing in her life was spectacularly, catastrophically out of control. The man waiting at the altar was not looking at her. He was looking at the floor. His jaw was tight. His hands were clasped behind his back with the kind of rigid stillness that told you he was either extraordinarily calm or one wrong word away from burning the whole building down. He was wearing a dark navy suit that probably cost more than Amelia's rent for 6 months, and his dark hair was swept back in that effortless way that only French men seem to manage without trying. He was, by every objective measure, the most beautiful and terrifying human being Amelia had ever seen in her life. She had known him for 43 days. She was about to marry him. The organ began to play. Amelia's feet would not move. The wedding coordinator behind her, a tiny woman named Sylvie, who had been shooting Amelia warning looks all morning, gave her a firm nudge between the shoulder blades. "Allez," she whispered. "Go." Amelia went. She walked down that aisle with her chin up and her heart hammering so loud she was genuinely concerned the front row could hear it, her eyes fixed on the man at the altar who still had not looked up, who still had not moved, who was so completely and entirely still that she almost stopped walking just to see if he was actually breathing. And then, 3 steps from the altar, he looked up. His eyes found hers. And Amelia Langston, who had promised herself she would feel nothing, who had signed a contract and drawn clear lines, and told herself this was business. Nothing more than business, felt something crack open in the center of her chest like the first light, breaking through after a very long winter. He was looking at her like she was the only real thing in the room. She hated him for it. She hated herself more for the way her breath caught. The officiant smiled. "We are gathered here today," and somewhere in the back of the church a door slammed open. "But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before the church, before the contract, before the 43 days that rewrote everything Amelia thought she knew about herself, and about love, and about the terrifying inconvenient ways that life refuses to follow the plan you made for it, there was a Tuesday morning in Paris, a very bad cup of coffee, and a man who was about to get the golding of his life. Before we get back to this story, if this is already pulling you in, and trust me, it is only just beginning, please hit that subscribe button right now, drop a comment below telling me what you think is going to happen, and share this with someone who loves a good love story, because this one is going to wreck you in the best possible way. Now, back to Amelia. Amelia had not intended to move to Paris. Paris had been her ex-boyfriend's dream, not hers. Marcus had talked about Paris the way some people talk about heaven, with longing and reverence and the complete certainty that once you got there, everything would finally make sense. For 4 years, Amelia had listened to Marcus talk about Paris. She had saved money for Paris. She had taken French lessons twice a week for Paris, sitting in a little classroom in London with 7 other adults, and a teacher named Monsieur Bertrand, who smelled like garlic and spoke too fast, and told Amelia her accent was charmant in a way that clearly meant the opposite. She had done all of that for Marcus. And then Marcus had sat across from her at their kitchen table on a Wednesday evening, in November, the dinner she had cooked still warm on the stove, and told her he was in love with someone else. Had been in love with someone else, he said, for the better part of a year. He said it calmly, reasonably, the way you might tell someone their package had been delayed, unfortunate, but ultimately not his fault. These things happen, he said. He was sorry. He said he hoped they could be civil. He said a great many things in that reasonable, measured voice, while Amelia sat across from him, felt the floor dissolve beneath her feet. 4 years. She had given that man 4 years of her life, 4 years of showing up, of choosing him, of building a future brick by careful brick, and he had taken every single one of those bricks and used them to build something with someone else, right under her nose, while she was busy learning French for a city he no longer wanted to go to with her. She had cried for 3 weeks. Then she had booked a one-way ticket to Paris. Not for Marcus. Not anymore. She went because she had earned that city with 4 years of sacrifice and 2 years of bad French lessons, and she was going to walk those streets and drink that coffee and see that tower, and she was going to take every beautiful thing she had planned for a future that no longer existed, and she was going to claim it for herself. That was 7 months ago. Now she lived in a small apartment in the 11th arrondissement, with a radiator that made sounds like it was slowly dying, and a view of a courtyard where an old man named Jard kept pigeons and argued with them on a daily basis. She worked as a junior coordinator at a mid-sized events company called Lumi Events, which organized galas and corporate functions and the occasional, obscenely extravagant private party for people whose net worth had so many zeros, it stopped feeling like real money. She was, by most measures, fine. She was fine in the way that people are fine when they are holding themselves together with pure stubbornness and dry humor, and the refusal to admit that fine is not the same as healed. Her best friend and co-worker, Jade, told her regularly that she needed to get back out there. Jade was Martinican, magnificent, recently engaged, and aggressively optimistic about love in a way that Amelia found both endearing and exhausting. "You cannot punish every future man for what Marcus did," Jade said one morning, dropping a coffee on Amelia's desk and perching on the edge of it with the ease of someone who owned every room she walked into. "I am not punishing anyone," Amelia said, not looking up from her spreadsheet. "I am simply prioritizing my peace." Back, you went home alone on a Friday night to watch a documentary about bridges. Bridges are fascinating, Amelia, Jade. Jade looked at her for a long moment with those enormous dark eyes that saw entirely too much. "One day," she said finally, "so known is going to come along, and all of that careful protecting you are doing is going to feel like the most pointless thing you ever did." Amelia smiled. "That is either a prophecy or a threat, and I genuinely cannot tell which." Both, Jade said cheerfully, and went back to her desk. That was on a Monday. On Tuesday, everything changed. The call came at 8:45 in the morning. Their director, a nervous, fast-talking man named Philippe, gathered the entire team in the small glass-walled conference room and told them, in a voice that suggested he had not slept in 2 days, that Lumiere Events had just secured the single biggest contract in the company's history, the Liam Foundation Gala. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Amelia looked at Jade. Jade's eyebrows were somewhere near her hairline. The Liam name was not simply well known in Paris. It was woven into the city the way the Seine was woven into its geography, so present, so foundational, that you stopped noticing it until someone pointed it out, and then you saw it absolutely everywhere. Liam Technologies, the Liam Cultural Center, the Liam wing of the Musée d'Orsay. The family had been in France for 3 generations, had built an empire that spanned technology and real estate and private investment, and sat at the very top of a very tall social pyramid in a way that made other wealthy families seem like they were merely playing at it. The head of it all was David Liam known, Philippe said in a lowered voice, as though the man might actually hear him, as the shadow. "Why do they call him that?" someone asked. Philippe looked uncomfortable. "He is present, but not present. He attends functions, but does not engage. He runs the company, but rarely appears in public. His employees say he can be in a room for an hour and you would not know he was there until something went wrong." He paused. "He is not known for his warmth." "Brilliant," Amelia said, under her breath. "Langston," Philippe said, and her stomach dropped because she knew the tone. You will be the lead coordinator on this account. The room went very quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when everyone is relieved. It is not them. Amelia kept her face completely neutral. Of course, she said. She was screaming internally. The first meeting with the Liam Foundation was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning at the Liam headquarters building on Avenue George, a building so aggressively elegant that it made Amelia feel slightly underdressed, even though she had worn her best blazer and spent 20 minutes on her hair. She arrived at 9:55, was processed through security by a man whose expression suggested he had never smiled in his professional life, and was delivered to a waiting room on the 14th floor that was all white marble and silence, and a single orchid on a glass table that looked like it cost more than her monthly salary. She waited. At 10 o'clock exactly, a young assistant appeared and led her down a corridor, so quiet she could hear her own heels on the marble, and it mortified her. They stopped at a set of double doors at the far end of the hall. The assistant knocked once, opened the door, and stepped aside. Amelia walked in. The office was enormous and almost aggressively minimal. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Paris skyline, grey and glittering under a January sky. There was a desk, the size of a small country. There were no personal items anywhere, no photographs, no decoration. Nothing that said a human being occupied this space with anything resembling feeling. There was a man standing at the window with his back to her. He did not turn around. Amelia stood in the doorway for a moment, waiting. She was a professional. She was patient. She waited a full 30 seconds, which is actually quite a long time when someone is deliberately ignoring you. Then she cleared her throat. Nothing. She set her portfolio down on the chair nearest the door, very deliberately, loudly enough to make a point. Still nothing. The man at the window continued to look out at the city as though she were a slight change in air pressure rather than a person who had taken 2 metros and a very aggressive walk to be here at exactly the time she had been told. Amelia looked at the back of his head. She thought about Philippe and the contract and her rent and the dying radiator and every sensible reason she had to smile politely and wait for however long this man decided to acknowledge her existence. She discarded all of them. "Bonjour," she said, in her best Monsieur Bertrand accent. "Hi, don't know if you were informed, but there is actually a person in your office, a real one, with a meeting that was scheduled for 10 o'clock, which for reference was 4 minutes ago, so whenever you are ready." The man at the window went very still. Not the stillness of someone who hadn't heard her, the stillness of someone who had heard every word and was deciding, with great deliberateness, what to do about it. He turned around, and Amelia, who had prepared herself for cold and had mentally girded herself for powerful and intimidating and probably rude, had not prepared herself for this, had not prepared for the jaw or the eyes or the way he looked at her, as though she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to find interesting and had just discovered he very much did. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You are the events coordinator." His voice was low and precise, and carried the slight music of someone who had grown up between languages, French at the bone, English at the surface. "I am," Amelia said, "Amelia Langston, and you are Mr. Liam, I assume." "No, I am." He walked to his desk, not quickly, not with any sense of apology for the 4 minutes he had spent ignoring her, and sat down. He looked at her, the way you look at something unfamiliar, not unkindly, just with a complete absence of the social performance most people put on. "Sit down, Miss Langston." She sat. "You are English, observant." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, a suggestion of one quickly retired. "And you've been in Paris for 7 months. She opened her portfolio. "I have several preliminary concepts for the gala that I'd like to walk you through. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I know your time is—" "How did you find the waiting room?" She looked up. "I am sorry, the waiting room. Most people find it uncomfortable." The silence. Amelia stared at him. "Mr. Liam, with respect, I came here to talk about your gala, not your furniture. The almost smile again. Of course, he leaned back in his chair. Show me what you have. She showed him. For the next hour, she walked him through venue concepts and catering proposals and lighting schemes and guest experience flow, and he listened the way very few clients listened, completely still, completely focused, asking questions that were sharp and precise, and told her he had actually absorbed every word she said. He made no small talk. He offered no pleasantries. He simply engaged with the work with the same total attention he seemed to bring to everything, and Amelia, who had been braced for difficult and dismissive, found herself recalibrating in real time. He was not what she had expected. He was something else entirely. At the end of the meeting he stood and extended his hand. You are direct, he said. Not as a criticism, as a statement of fact. I find it saves time, she said, shaking it. It does. He held her gaze for one beat longer than necessary. I'll have my assistant schedule the next review. Amelia picked up her portfolio. She was almost at the door when he spoke again. Miss Langston, she turned. You said I was observant. That almost smile was doing something more serious to his face now, something that changed the whole geography of it. I am. You should know that going forward. She had absolutely no idea what to do with that sentence. She left. She was in the elevator, going down before she realized her heart was beating faster than it had any business doing. No, she told herself, firmly in the mirrored elevator wall. Her reflection looked unconvinced. She saw him again 4 days later, which she had not expected. The second meeting had been scheduled with his team, 3 efficient, identically serious people who handled the foundation's logistics, and Amelia had not anticipated Liam himself being there. He was not supposed to be there. Philippe had told her that the principal would delegate the details, and yet there he was, seated at the end of the conference table in another impeccable suit, doing something on his phone when she walked in, which he put down the moment she entered the room. Just put it down, mid-whatever, set it face down, and gave her the same complete, unsettling attention as before. He was not supposed to be at that meeting. He was at every meeting after that. Amelia began to notice things she did not want to notice. The way he always positioned himself where he could see the door. The way he listened, not just to what was being said, but to the space around, right? The hesitations and the qualifications, the things people almost said. The way his entire face changed when his nephew arrived unexpectedly at one of their site visits. Oliver, who was 12 and gap-toothed, and spoke to his uncle in rapid French, with his hands flying everywhere, and was the only person in any room who seemed to make David Liam look like he might, under the right circumstances, laugh. He is your nephew, Amelia had said, watching the two of them argue affectionately about something involving football. David had glanced at her. My brother's son. He is wonderful. Something had crossed David's face then, something that was gone before she could name it. Yes, he said quietly, he is. She noticed the way his employees moved around him, not with fear exactly, though there was that, but with the specific tension of people who are never quite sure what they are dealing with. He was civil with them. He was fair, as far as she could tell. He simply did not connect. He moved through his own company like weather, present, impactful, not personal. She noticed one evening, when they were the last 2 people in a venue they had stayed late to assess, that he had moved to stand closer to her, and had not appeared to realize he had done. She noticed that she had not stepped away. She was noticing far too many things. You are in trouble, Jade said, when Amelia did not tell her any of this, but somehow communicated all of it anyway, through the specific way she described the gala planning as fine, totally fine. Very professional. I am not in anything, Amelia said. Your left eye is doing the thing. My left eye does not do a thing. Edith, one day, Lee. It absolutely does a thing. It has done the thing exactly twice before that I have witnessed. Once when you tried that dessert at Brasserie Noire, and once when you were talking about Mr. We are not finishing that sentence. Jade smiled the smile of someone holding an entire hand of cards. Just be careful, ma belle. Amelia was careful. She was very, very careful. Right up until the night of the Foundation's pre-gala dinner, when a woman in a red dress leaned over and murmured something in David's ear, and he caught Amelia watching, and did not look away. The careful thing she had been maintaining cracked, right down the middle, like something that had been under pressure for too long. She was standing on the balcony afterward, needing air and the kind of quiet that only the city at night can give you, when she heard footsteps behind her. She did not turn around. "You've been avoiding me for 20 minutes, David said. "I've been getting air. You walked past 3 open balconies to get to this one." Turned around then. He was leaning in the doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he looked less like the shadow and more like a man. Just a man, which was somehow more dangerous. "Do you always track where people are?" she asked. "No," he said simply. "Just no." No further explanation. Amelia crossed her arms. Who was the woman in red? Code? She had not meant to ask that. It came out anyway, because her mouth had a well-documented relationship with saying things before her brain signed off on them. David looked at her for a moment. A business associate, she seemed. Amelia stopped. "It is not my business. I apologize." She seemed what? Familiar with you. "People often try to seem familiar with me," he said, with a flatness that made it sound less like arrogance and more like a fact he found mildly deous. "It rarely means anything." He moved to stand beside her at the railing, leaving a careful distance between them that was still somehow not enough distance. Below them, Paris went about its business, indifferent and glittering. "Why did it bother you?" "It didn't bother me, Miss Langston." "Do that." "Do what?" "Say my name like that. Like you already know the answer, and you are just waiting for me to catch up." He was quiet for a moment. When she glanced at him, he was looking out at the city, and something in his expression was entirely unguarded in a way she had never seen it before. "You are the most honest person I have met in a very long time," he said. It was not a line. She could tell the difference between lines and true things, had learned that the hard way, and this was a true thing, said by someone who was not accustomed to saying them. It frightened her more than anything else he could have done. "I should go back inside," she said. "Yes," he agreed. Neither of them moved. Below them, a couple walked along the street, close together, laughing about something, oblivious to being observed. Amelia watched them, and felt the old ache, the one she usually kept carefully, boxed shift in her chest. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Do you ever get lonely?" Code, she felt, rather than saw him turn to look at her. The question hung between them in the cold January air. "Everyone gets lonely," he said finally. "That is not an answer." "No," his voice was quieter now. "It isn't." She looked at him then, and found him already looking at her, and the distance between them felt very different from what it had been a minute ago, more like a choice than a gap. Her phone buzzed Jade, asking where she was. Amelia looked at the phone, looked back at Davium, with his careful eyes and his unexpected honesty and his enormous fuscaus. "Good night, Mr. Liam," she said. She went inside. She did not sleep well. 3 days later, Philippe called her into his office and closed the door, which was never a good sign. "The Liam account," he said. I know. The timeline for the floral vendors needs to be. Mr. Liam has requested you personally for all future coordination, not the team. You specifically." Philippe was looking at her with an expression that was equal parts delighted and deeply worried. "He called me directly this morning," he said, and I am quoting, "that he found your working style to be the most efficient he had encountered." Amelia sat with that for a moment. "His words," Philippe added. "I heard you, Amelia. This is the Liam account. I know what account it is, Philippe, so you understand why I am saying yes, and why I am also saying," he paused, "just be professional." "I am always professional." You told a client his seating arrangement looked like a punishment last month. It did look like a punishment. He thanked me for it. Philippe made a gesture that suggested this was not the reassurance he was looking for. Amelia went back to her desk, sat down, and stared at her screen. She thought about efficient. She thought about the balcony. She thought about the way he had said, "Everyone gets lonely," like it cost him something to admit it. "You are in so much trouble," Jade said, without looking up from her keyboard. "Shut up, Jade. I said what I said." The weeks that followed had a particular quality that Amelia would later struggle to describe. They were professional weeks. Objectively, demonstrably professional. She and David met for gala planning. They reviewed vendors and venues and guest lists. They had a heated and entirely work-appropriate disagreement about the entertainment lineup that lasted 45 minutes and ended with him conceding her point in a way that managed to feel like neither defeat nor performance, just simple acknowledgement that she had been right. He was always there. That was the thing she could not account for. Logically, functionally, there was no reason for the principal of a foundation of this size to be personally present at a mid-level planning meeting about table linens, and yet she would look up from her notes and he would be there, in a chair slightly apart from everyone else, watching her with that specific quality of attention that made her feel simultaneously observed and understood, which was different from how observation usually felt, which was usually like being assessed. Started talking to her differently. Small things, not flirtation. She had radar for flirtation, and this was not that. More like someone who had decided, quietly and without announcement, that they were allowed to be real around her. He told her, with complete deadpan delivery, about a board meeting that had apparently been so pointless he had spent the last 20 minutes of it mentally redesigning the room. He asked her what she thought about a news story he had read that morning with the genuine curiosity of someone who actually wanted to know, not someone looking for an entry point into a monologue about his own views. Oliver appeared at 2 more site visits, claiming each time to have been in the area, which was increasingly implausible, and which Amelia suspected was entirely orchestrated by Oliver himself. Had developed a habit of falling into step beside her and asking her questions about London with the intensity of a child who was building a comprehensive mental database. "Do they really eat beans for breakfast?" he asked her once, with the expression of someone addressing a matter of deep personal concern. "They really do, on toast, on toast." He considered this for a long moment. "And you like it?" "I love it." Oliver looked at his uncle with the expression of someone filing away a crucial data point. David met Amelia's eyes over his nephew's head that almost smile again. More smile than almost now, just slightly, just enough. She looked away before it could do anything further to her. The first time she saw cracks in the fortress was an evening in February when they were walking back from a venue in the Muraris, and Oliver had run ahead because he had spotted our TAP stand. David had let him go with the ease of someone who had long since stopped, pretending to be the kind of authority figure who argued about crumbs. They walked in the peculiar companionable quiet that had developed between them, the kind that only exists between people who have spent enough time together that silence no longer requires explanation. "Your family must miss you," David said, "being so far from London." "My family thinks I am having an adventure," Amelia said. "My mother calls it my eat, pray, love era." "Is it?" She considered. "It started as running away," she said, because she had stopped being careful about what she admitted to him somewhere around week 3, which was itself a problem she was choosing not to examine. "I think it is turning into something else, something more like showing up." He nodded slowly. "What were you running from?" She glanced at him. He was looking ahead, giving her the option of the profile, the out, if she wanted it. "Someone," she said. 4 years of someone who turned out to be, she searched for the word, provisional. Like I was the placeholder version, until the real thing came along. A beat of silence. "That says more about his failure of perception than about your worth," David said. It was delivered with the same flat precision he brought to everything. No softening around it, no performance of sympathy, just a clean statement of what he apparently considered to be obvious fact. And somehow that was more devastating than any carefully crafted comfort would have been. She stopped walking. He stopped a half step later and turned to look at her. "Sorry," he said, reading her expression with that unnerving accuracy. "Was that?" "No," she said. "It was exactly right. It just—" She laughed a little, unexpectedly, height differently. He looked at her for a moment, something in his face that she was getting better at reading, that slight shift around the eyes that meant something was happening under the surface that he had not yet decided to put into words. "I would like," he started, "Uncle David." Oliver was running back toward them at full speed, pie in hand, chocolate on his chin, radiating the specific triumphant energy of a child who has successfully acquired a snack. They had Nutella and banana. "I got you one." He held up a second CRIP already slightly mangled. "I dropped it once, but only on the paper side." David accepted the CRIP with the gravity of someone receiving a state gift. The moment dissolved. Amelia breathed. What had he been about to say? She thought about it for 3 days. Then the other thing happened. Marcus called on a Thursday afternoon, which was so specifically absurd that for a moment Amelia assumed she had misread the caller ID. She had not misread it. It was Marcus, sounding cautious and hopeful in that particular Marcus way, calling to say he was in Paris, had been in Paris for a week actually, was there for work, had been thinking about reaching out since he arrived, and had, finally— "What do you want, Marcus?" she said. He wanted coffee, just coffee, he said, just to talk. He had been thinking about her, he said, about them, about how perhaps he had made a mistake, and— "You were with her for a year before you told me," Amelia said. Her voice was very calm. She was proud of how calm it was. "While we were together, you made that choice every single day for a year. That is not a mistake, Marcus, that is a decision." Silence. "I know," he said, quietly. "I know you are right. I am always right. That was always your real problem." She paused. "I hope you are well, Marcus. I genuinely do. Don't call me again." She hung up. She sat with it for a moment, doing an internal inventory, waiting for the floor to drop, for the old wound to tear open. It didn't. There was something there, a tenderness, the way an old scar feels when you press it, but the floor was still solid under her feet, and she was still entirely herself. And that was actually remarkable. She was still sitting with this revelation when she looked up and found David Liam standing in the doorway of the small office she had been using for planning calls. She had not heard him arrive, had not heard much of anything. He said nothing, just looked at her with that steady attention. "I had a phone call," she said. "I heard." He looked almost, not sorry, something adjacent to sorry, something like a man who had walked into something he hadn't intended to witness and was uncertain what his presence cost her. It is fine." She meant it. It was fine. She paused. "It was more fine than I expected it to be." He came fully into the room then and sat down across from her, not adjacent, not at a professional distance, just across, close enough that it was a choice. "The person you were running from," he said. "Yes, he wants to come back. He thinks he does. He'll be fine." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I used to think that losing him was the worst thing that had ever happened to me." She looked up. "I am starting to think it was the most necessary." David was looking at her with an expression that had dropped every layer of the shadow, and was just a man watching someone say a true thing, moved by it in a way he was not trying to hide. "Amelia," he said, her name not Miss Langston. "Amelia, first time." "Yes," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. He stopped, tried again. "There is something I have been." His phone rang. He closed his eyes briefly, a gesture so human and so frustrated that she almost laughed. He looked at the screen, his expression closed. "I have to take this." He stood. He walked to the door, then turned back. "This conversation is not finished," he said. It was not a request. She left. Amelia sat in the small office for a full minute before she stood up. "Get yourself together," she told herself. She did not get herself together. The engagement conversation happened 11 days later. She had been summoned, and summoned was the right word, not invited, not asked, because David Liam did not ask things in the conventional sense. To his office on a Tuesday morning, she arrived, expecting a planning meeting. There was no planning team present, just David, standing at the window again in a different dark suit, and a single document on the desk between them. She looked at the document. She looked at him. "What is this?" she said. "A proposal." He turned from the window. "Sit down, Amelia. I prefer to stand for things that have the word proposal in them." He walked to his desk. He picked up the document. He handed it to her directly. She took it because her hands apparently operated independently of her better judgment. It was a contract. She read it. She read it again. The words rearranged themselves into meanings she could not make fit with the world she had been operating in until about 90 seconds ago. "You want me to be your fiancé," she said. "Yes, fake fianc. Engaged, the authenticity of the feeling is, for the purposes of this arrangement, immaterial." What? Amelia put the document down on the desk with a care that suggested she was using the action to prevent herself from doing something more emphatic with it. "Let me understand this. You want me to pretend to be engaged to you, correct? Because your family is pressuring you to marry. P. Because my family controls the final tranche of foundation funding and has made marriage a condition of its release. Yes, that is," she searched for the word, "medieval. My grandmother is 81 and feels strongly about legacy." David, his name in her mouth. First time she had used it. She watched something move in his face. "You cannot be serious." "I am always serious. I am aware. I am asking you to be something else right now." She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "You have money, you have lawyers, you have an entire architecture of people whose job is to solve problems for you. Why on earth would you come to me?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because," he said, and his voice had that quality it sometimes got, stripped of its professional surface, just the true thing underneath. "You are the only person I know who cannot be managed." Cut. She stared at him. "Everyone in my life is." He made a gesture that encompassed, apparently, the entirety of his existence. "Performing. They want something from me. They have a position to maintain. You don't." He met her eyes. "You told me my office was cold within 40 seconds of meeting me. You corrected me in front of my own board members about the venue acoustics, and you were right. You asked me if I was lonely on a balcony in January, like it was a perfectly normal question." He paused. "You are the only real person I have spent meaningful time with in years." The silence that followed that statement was very loud. "This is the most romantic and the most insane context in which I have ever been asked anything," Amelia said. Another almost smile, more real than ever before. "I know I am an events coordinator. I am not." She gestured at herself, at the room, at the implication. "I don't belong in your world, David." Or, "I disagree. You cannot just disagree with observable reality." "I can. I frequently do. It is, as you noted, one of my more aggravating qualities." He stepped closer, not aggressively, carefully, like someone who was aware of every inch of the distance between them and was choosing deliberately to reduce it. "I am not asking you to pretend to be something you are not. I am asking you to be exactly what you are, in a different context." Amelia looked at him. At this impossible, controlled, unexpectedly honest man with his walls and his nephew and his almost smile, who was standing in front of her, offering her the most absurd proposition she had ever encountered. She thought about Marcus, about 4 years of being chosen second. She thought about the balcony, about the Kral IPP, about this conversation is not finished. She thought about the woman she had been 7 months ago, boarding a plane to someone else's dream, about who she was becoming now, about the specific courage of a woman who had lost love and walked toward living anyway. "I have conditions," she said. Something shifted in his expression, something that was relief and something that was heat, and something that she was not ready to name. "Tell me your conditions." She listed them. She was very specific. She was impressively specific. Actually, he agreed to every one without argument, except the last, which he negotiated back from her terms to his with the precise, almost playful persistence of a man who was enjoying himself for the first time in longer than either of them could measure. She signed the document. She told herself it was business. She was already a liar. The thing about a forced proximity, about being woven into someone's life by contract and obligation, is that it removes the architecture of self-protection that normal courtship allows you. With Marcus, she had built herself slowly, managed her reveal, calibrated what she showed, and when, with David, there was no such luxury. She was in his home by the end of the first week, his actual home, a house in the 16th, that was all clean lines and expensive silence, and a garden that Oliver treated like his personal sports ground. And proximity does things to walls that distance cannot. She learned that he woke before 6 every morning and drank his coffee standing at the kitchen window, looking at the garden in the grey early light, and she would sometimes find him there on her way to the kitchen, and they would stand together and not talk, and it was somehow the most companionable not talking she had ever experienced. She learned that he read compulsively everywhere, books in French and English, and sometimes Italian, dog-eared in the corners, which was the one genuinely chaotic thing about him, and which she found disproportionately endearing. She learned that he was extraordinary with Oliver, patient in a way that did not look like performance, present in a way that you could feel, giving the boy his full attention, with none of the questioning he applied to everything else. She had once rounded a corner to find David lying flat on the garden floor with Oliver, because Oliver had wanted to see what beetles saw when they looked at the sky, and he had just lain down in his work clothes without hesitation. She had stood at the corner for a full minute before backing away quietly. Oliver, she discovered, was entirely aware of everything that was happening between his uncle and Amelia, and was conducting a silent, strategic 12-year-old campaign to accelerate it. "Do you know how to cook?" he asked Amelia one evening when David was on a call. "I do. Uncle David can't. I am aware. I found the evidence." Wade. Oliver nodded with the gravity of a general assessing terrain. "He needs someone who can cook, Oliver, and someone who tells him true things, Oliver, and someone who doesn't leave." He looked at her with those dark, too old eyes. "Everyone always leaves him, because he doesn't know how to make them stay. But you are different. You stay even when he is difficult." Amelia sat with that for a long moment. "He is not difficult," she said finally. "He really is," Oliver said, "but you don't run from it." He picked up his football. "I think that is important." He went back to the garden. Amelia stayed at the table for a long time after that. The public appearances were the other thing. She had not anticipated how it would feel to be beside him in public, in the social architecture of his world, the dinners and the events and the quiet power gatherings that rich families call informal get-togethers. He moved differently with her there, not softer, not different on the surface, but she was attuned to him now in a way she had not anticipated, could read the small indicators, and with her beside him, he was less like a building and more like a person occupying one. When someone said something he found obtuse, he no longer simply removed himself from the conversation. He looked at her first, quick checking, like someone reaching for a reference point that had recently become essential. She was not supposed to be a reference point. She was supposed to be an arrangement. His grandmother had been the wild card. Amelia had dreaded meeting her, had imagined someone cold and imperial and dissecting. Madame Liam was 81 and small and had eyes that had been watching. People make fools of themselves for decades and found it primarily entertaining. She had taken Amelia's hand at their first meeting and held it for a moment, saying nothing, just looking. and then looked at David with an expression that Amelia could not decode. Later she would understand what that expression meant. In the car on the way home from that first meeting, David had said, in the tone of a man reporting something unexpected, "Freischu, how can you tell?" She asked if you played cards. "Is that significant?" "She has played cards with 4 people in the last 20 years, he said. "My mother, Oliver, my lawyer, and a man named Bernard, who is her doctor and who she invites purely to beat him at rummy." Pause. She said you looked like someone who knew how to win without cheating. Amelia thought about this. "I do know how to win without cheating." "I know," he said, and he was almost smiling. It was his brother who undid everything. Philippe Liam arrived from Lyon on a wet morning, with the energy of someone who had been looking for a specific conversation for a long time, and had finally arranged the circumstances to have it. He was like David, only in structure, the same jaw, the same height. But where David was still, Philippe moved and talked and laughed, with an overflow that explained, Amelia thought, why Oliver was the way he was. He was charming. She liked him immediately. She trusted him slightly less for it, which was a reflex she recognized and tried to adjust. The dinner that first evening was actually lovely. Philippe was funny. Oliver was incandescent with happiness at having both his uncle and his father present. David was different with Philippe, not warm exactly, but the walls were lower, the static presence less deliberate. She could see the brothers they might have been, under different circumstances, under the weight of a family legacy that seemed to have pressed the warmth out of David slowly and over a long time. After dinner, after Oliver had been sent to bed, and David had stepped out to take a call, Philippe leaned across the table and looked at Amelia with the expression of someone about to say a true thing. "I should tell you something," he said, "about why David suggested the engagement." She went still. "The family pressure is real," he said. "I want to be clear about that. Grandma is genuinely old-fashioned, and the funding is genuinely contingent." He paused. "But David has had arrangements before. Twice. Both times with women who moved in different circles, who understood the transactional nature and had no interest beyond the transaction. He was watching her carefully. He has never used someone who was also working closely with the family, never someone he saw regularly. He is very controlled in how he structures things." Amelia kept her expression neutral, with considerable effort. "He chose you specifically," Philippe said. "I want you to know that, not as a managed selection from an appropriate social set. He looked at his wine-glass. "My brother has not chosen anything for himself in a very long time. He runs the company. He manages the obligations. He does what is required. What he wants." He shook his head. He stopped believing he was allowed to want things when he was about 23, and our father handed him the keys to all of this. He looked back at her. "Whatever you think this arrangement is, it is more than that. On his side." Amelia felt the floor shift. "Why are you telling me this?" she said quietly. Philippe smiled. "Because you are the first person in a very long time who has made my brother look like himself." He stood. "I am telling you because I think you should know what you are actually dealing with." He said good night. He left the room. Amelia sat at the table alone. She heard David come back inside. She heard him speak briefly to Philippe in the hallway. She heard footsteps coming toward the dining room. She had approximately 15 seconds to decide what to do with a truth she had been studiously not looking at for weeks. She was in love with him. She had probably been in love with him since the balcony. She was in love with a man who had contracted her into his life because she was the one real thing he had found in it, and she had no reliable idea, whether what she had seen in him, in the quiet kitchen mornings and the Beatles study, and this conversation is not finished, was what she thought it was. David walked in, stopped when he saw her face. "What did Philippe say?" he said. "Not a question." She stood up. She was not going to do this sitting down. "He told me," she said, "that you chose me specifically." David's jaw tightened. He said. She stopped. tried again. Her heart was doing something unfair. Is that true? A long moment he walked further into the room, stood across the table from her, the same distance as the day of the contract, different weight entirely. Yes, he said. Onan word, clean. No hedge, no qualification. Why didn't you tell me that? Because you had conditions, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite humor and not quite pain, and one of them was that this would be professional. She had said that. She had been very clear about it, and, she said, he looked at her. And I agreed to your conditions, he said. I was trying to. He stopped. I don't do this well, he said. I want to be clear about that. I don't have experience with saying, another stop. David Liam, who was precise and controlled and fluent in 7 kinds of professional communication, could not find his words. She had never loved him more, David, she said gently. He looked at her. Stop trying to say it correctly, she said. Just say it. He took a breath. I want you to stay, he said, not in the house. Not in the arrangement. I want, he searched. I want the mornings. I want the arguments. I want you to tell me when I am being impossible, and I want Oliver to keep conducting his transparent matchmaking campaign, and I want... His voice was very quiet now, very stripped of everything but the true thing. I want you to stop leaving rooms when I am about to say something important. Amelia felt tears. She was furious at them, and also entirely unable to stop them. You were also leaving rooms, she said, voice a little unsteady. I know. He came around the table, stopped in front of her, close. That deliberate choice again. I know I was. I am not. He looked at her. I have been the shadow for a long time. I don't know how to be anything else with any reliability. I may be difficult, she said. Yes, I know, she said. He reached up and very carefully, with the specific care of someone handling something they have wanted to touch for a long time, tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. Amelia, he said. Yes, she said. He kissed her. It was not the kind of kiss that announces itself. It was the kind that arrives like something that was always going to happen, quiet and certain, and entirely reorganizing of everything that came before it. She put her hand on his chest, felt his heartbeat, unexpectedly fast, and thought he was scared too. They were both scared. They were both choosing it anyway, which brings us back to the church. The ivory dress, the white roses, the piano music, the 200 people holding their breath. Between that kitchen moment and this moment, logistics and family negotiations, and a grandmother who had smiled at over a game of Rami in a way that told Amelia she had known the whole time, and Philippa, who had wed with Uenji, that was deeply irritating, and Ollie Urenji that was deeply irritating, because 12-year-olds are the most honest people on earth. But the door had just slammed open. Amelia was 3 steps from the altar. David had looked up. The officiant had begun to speak. And now, from the back of the church, came the voice of a woman in a grey coat who apparently had something to say about this wedding. She was one of David's board members, sharp-faced, furious. She strode down the aisle with the energy of someone who had made a significant miscalculation and was attempting to salvage it through aggression. This marriage is a fraud, she announced. The church went even quieter than it had been before. Amelia turned to look at this woman. Then she turned to look at David, who was watching the woman approach with the expression of someone who had expected this, had planned for this, and was remarkably unperturbed. It started as an arrangement, he said to the church, to the woman, to Amelia. His voice carried without effort, the voice of a man who had been the most important person in every room he had ever entered. That is true, he looked at Amelia. It is no longer an arrangement. He looked at the assembled guests. If anyone requires further clarification, I am available after the ceremony. The board member opened her mouth. Sylvie, David said. The small wedding coordinator appeared from nowhere, as she always seemed to, and took the board member firmly by the arm, and began moving her with polite inexorability toward the side door. The church remained stunned. Amelia looked at David. He extended his hand. She thought about a Tuesday morning and a cup of terrible coffee, and a man at a window who had not turned around, and how every single step between that moment and this one had been taking her somewhere she had not expected, but which turned out to be exactly where she was meant to arrive. She thought about the woman she had been at that kitchen table in London. The floor dissolving, 4 years dissolving, certain that the worst thing had happened. The worst thing had been a door. She took his hand, she took the last 3 steps. The efficient, to his immense credit, carried on as though doors were slammed open at weddings all the time. Perhaps in the world of the Liam family they were. "We are gathered here today," he said, "to celebrate the marriage of David Liam and Amelia Langston." In the second row, Oliver was crying and absolutely refusing to admit it. In the back, Philippe was smiling the smile of a man who had set a very small stone rolling down hill one evening at a dinner table, and had watched it become this. In the front row, Madame Liam was sitting with her hands folded, and an expression of someone whose plans had unfolded exactly as she intended, which perhaps they had. And at the altar, Amelia Langston, who had loved a man for 4 years only to have the ground taken out from under her, who had bought a one-way ticket to someone else's dream and found her own, who had walked into a cold office on a January morning and accidentally scolded the most closed-off man in France, and somehow, impossibly, found her way into the one room in him nobody else had ever been given access to. She looked at her person, her impossible, difficult, honest, almost smiling person, and she was not afraid. She was home.